might be of concern. Now we go one step further, and when we talk about nanosensors, there are now these devices potentially getting small enough that they go inside our bodies. A primary use and motivation for developing these things would be basically medical diagnostics and therapeutics to help us in our own medical treatments. But a secondary use would then be that they have very early detection of things that might be going wrong in a number of different people in very subtle ways that you only would notice early on if you aggregate it from a large number of people. So say for early detection of epidemics, either natural or deliberately created. Now let me turn to some of the social and institutional aspects of these sensors. Supposing you can make them, supposing you can get them deployed, and so on. The kinds of things that we're generally be concerned with are looking for fairly rare events, or hopefully fairly rare events. And it's one thing to have a chemical sensor that can detect single molecules of whatever. It's quite a different thing to decide from all this information that many of these sensors might be providing, whether they're actually seeing anything that's normal, interesting, whether there's anything that you need to do about it. So this question of finding rare events is an important thing to keep in mind about not just how good the sensors are, but how it is we're going to respond to the information that they collect. And this leads to the problem of false alarms. So you can have the sensors that say, oh, I'm looking for some particular, say, toxin or whatever it might be, but these sensors will not be perfect, and you might have something that just triggers an alarm, and do you respond? Do you say, well, I'm going to wait until a certain number of sensors from different places or something? You have to have some kind of policies on that, and different people might have different thresholds in which they become concerned and want to do something. And of course, if there are too many false alarms, as we're all familiar with car alarms all over the place, eventually people just say, oh, it's always a false alarm. I'll just ignore it or I'll turn it off. And then you have a good chance that you'll miss the real alarm. So the issue of false alarms, and how is it that various groups that would collect this information, how do they tell the public about that? How is it that you convey to people what is it that might be a concern? Oh, we're not so sure, but maybe there's a little bit more risk. If you do this too often, people will just tune it out. There's also, of course, a big fear about how the information of these sensors might be misused in various ways. And in particular, I talked about, say, some of these medical sensors that are put there for your own medical benefit, and then someone could ask, well, would you mind sharing the information with who knows whom, so we can have a good early detection of epidemics. And that might make very good sense from the point of view of a society as a whole, but the information that these sensors collect is also very intrusive, and it could be at things as simple as, well, I'll be embarrassed if someone finds out where I was last night, or if I have a particular kind of health condition that's coming up but it's not yet serious, maybe I'll lose my health insurance if the insurance companies find out about this. Or toward more serious things, you might end up with some legal sanctions that you would want to worry about. And all these kinds of things at an individual level could make perfect sense to say, I don't want the information on this, whatever sensors I have, to be distributed to whoever. I want to keep the information to myself. And this actually raises a public policy kind of issue, and that is, how much do we focus on, say, some of the individual sanctions, if you like, that these sensors could be used for, realizing that the more and more we focus on, say, using the sensors to prevent people individually from doing bad things, will lead to people being less willing to reveal this information, and therefore we could be blinded as a society to much larger threats just because people become reluctant to reveal the information or carry the sensors around and so on. And then this basically leads to what the economists would call a public goods problem, which is kind of basically the idea, well, I'm kind of worried a little bit about all this information, my information getting out, but I am also worried about these threats. But oh, by the way, if all my neighbors have all this sensor information that they're displaying, well, I could just think I'll be protected by them, and so I don't have to share my personal information. And of course, if everybody thinks that way, nobody gets any information at all, and it's a classic public goods problem, which comes up in many, many situations that societies face all the time, and there's a variety of economic approaches to try to change the incentives of that. And then we come to the issue of, well, suppose there are lots of sensors out there and they're producing a variety of information and people are summarizing them in different ways. How can we trust them? I mean, we see what happens with email and spam and so on, and people might deliberately want to spoof these sensors and so on. And so, you know, one general idea is you get robustness from diversity. Diversity of the sensor types, diversity of who owns the sensors, of where they are, of different people collecting the information, and so on. But you also have to be aware that networks can be vulnerable to deliberate false rumor spreading, or even inadvertently, multiple sources could be claiming there's a problem, but they're actually all just getting the same news story, if you like, and just republishing it over and over again, so to speak. One kind of approach to that is then various social or economic reputation mechanisms to think of, well, who is it that owns the sensor? How is it that they've behaved in the past? Could we use the social networks that we have informally as well as that are becoming explicit online and so on to try to deal with propagating trust through things? So I not only get information, but I get, if you like, a justification of why I should believe it, because it has some various sources that certify it. And these are sources that I in particular trust, and someone else may not trust those sources, and you know, they have their own network. So to summarize, sensors that are widely distributed and so on are one approach to threat reduction, particularly looking at the issue of very small groups being able to use advanced technologies to do large-scale detrimental things to society. How is it that you can tell ahead of time? There are challenges, both technical and sociological or institutional and public policy with respect to making these devices, deploying them, getting people to be willing to have them around and so on, and adequately using them. And here is just a couple of places to look for further reading. If you're interested more in the technological end of it, there was a special issue a couple of years ago in Applied Physics that was looking at nanoelectronics, which involves both the computation and control of these devices as well as what sorts of chemicals and so on that they can sense. Probably more of you might be interested in some of the social and policy issues surrounding these things. And I imagine most of you have heard of David Brin's book, The Transparent Society, which looked at a number of these issues. David Friedman has also looked more generally at some of the economic issues involved with dealing with technological advancements. And then there's also a more specifically oriented toward sensors and open source sensing project. So while I leave these here, I'm happy to take any questions.